This time I'd like to talk about something called, it's horrible names, it's co-morbidity. And what it basically means is the coexisting areas of need. So quite often when somebody has one area of need that's been diagnosed and assessed and labelled, if you like, there are other things from other areas of need that are also present. Now, normally there would be a primary area of need. So this is the main thing that is the area of need for that child. But along with that, they have other aspects of other things. So, for example, I'm dyslexic, and obviously that has major implications for the written word, reading, writing, spelling, all of those things. But there's also things like, I mean, you've probably noticed in some of these videos, my hands don't stop moving. I don't stop moving. I'm always on the go. I think best when I'm moving around. And now I do not have ADHD. However, there are people who say, are you a bit ADHD? I'm not ADHD, but you can see little traces of it in the way I settle my brain. If I'm giving a tutorial, for example, I will pace up and down, and I pace with purpose, if you like. I'm really going for it because being active actually helps me to think. It's just the way my brain works, you know. So what I'm talking about is the fact that yes, labels can be very useful. For me personally, getting my label of dyslexia helped my self-esteem. It helped me to think, no, there's a reason why I'm slow at this, I find this difficult. It's not a total disaster. There's actually a reason behind it. And okay, I have better intellect than I thought. I really struggled with believing in my brain power, if you like, and the label really helped me raise my self-esteem. For other people, a label can actually do the opposite. There are people who are like, no, I'm useless because I have this. Whereas mine is more, I've got this, and that actually, I had somebody refer to their ADHD recently as their superpower. And they talk about it as a superpower because there are positives for all these things. So, for example, along with the struggling with the reading and the writing and the organisation, all that stuff, and the disability to just go straight there, think in a straight line. My brain goes all over the place. Now, that could be seen as a disadvantage, but there are advantages because on the way I pick up this idea and this idea and this idea and this idea, and there's a creativity of approach that comes with my dyslexia. So there's something really positive. People with things like ADHD may be all over the place with their organisation, but quite often they've got this really amazing level of concentration for something which is really interesting them. They can keep that deep focus, which seems counterintuitive when you think of ADHD and being all over the place, but actually there's some amazing deep thinking as well as a lot of creativity. The same would go with AS. So somebody who's on the autistic spectrum may have difficulties with nuances and things like that, and they may have other areas. As I say, there's this comorbidity. You quite often find there are sensory needs. So, for example, I've been talking a lot about Born Anxious recently. They do the most soft clothing imaginable. It's absolutely amazing. But also it doesn't have labels. You know, everything I've got has a label cut out. But if I buy from them, I know there aren't any labels. People with autism quite often have that sensory need, so need the labels cut out. They can't cope with the certain smells, or even things not being exactly where they should be, sort of being slightly out and all that. However, again, amazing focus, incredible attention to detail, and ability to really drill deep into something, which is incredibly useful. So there are positives. So it's worth being aware that there are things that go across a whole range of needs, so such as processing, speed, and processing, all aspects of processing, being able to process auditory processing, visual processing, can be an area of need for people with a range of areas such as autism, ADHD, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, dyslexia, and so on. These can be really big issues. Other people find that their speed of processing is really fast, but their coordination, for example, somebody with dyspraxia can't keep up with the processing speed. So there can be a mismatch between the practical side of things, the physical side of things, and what's going on in the brain. Also, there is also a lot, as well as the comorbidity I've talked about, which is like one area of need plus another. So a child I taught with cerebral palsy was also very dyslexic, had serious dyslexia issues and so on and concerns. So you've got those, but you also quite often have this what we call dual exceptionality, which is where you have this high brain power, for want of a better way of putting it. So very intelligent, but there are certain aspects of learning that are incredibly difficult for them. And what happens with that is one can mask the other, and that's the same with comorbidity. If you focus so much on, say for example, somebody with dyslexia, and you're focusing on their spelling, how little they've written, how slow they've been at things, they can appear to be lazy and get put in a lower ability set, when actually their brain power's up here. It's just their way of presenting it through the written word that's the issue. You can also have things where somebody's behaviour, which is actually the expression, the manifest, the sort of frustration coming out, it's a form of communication, that could be being focused on, and it could be masking an area of need that's underlying that, such as it could be, as I say, all the ones I've already mentioned, as well as things like speech language communication needs. All sorts of things could be impacting on the behaviour, and then all the focus goes on the behaviour, and they forget about what's actually causing that behaviour, what's underlying it, what's going wrong, and what could be done to support. So labels can matter, they can be really helpful. However, one of the things we need to do is identify what the areas of need actually are, and by that I don't mean the label, I mean what is it that is difficult for that child, what is that child finding hard. And if I know that, if I know what the child finds hard, then it's easier for me to think in terms of what strategies to employ. Okay, so this is about using the right strategies because of what is needed as opposed to what is labelled. In the same way, two people with dyslexia or autism or dyscalculia are not going to have identical needs as such. They'll have certain strengths and certain areas that need strategies for support. So we need to focus on what is needed for that child, not for every child with this label. It's not like that. It's each individual child. So I'm going to talk through a few strategies, some I've mentioned before. I'm going to start with puppets. That's not actually first on my list, but I'm going to talk about puppets first because they normally go down well. So here is Spike. I've talked about him before. Spike is a porcupine, and Spike is very useful when you're talking to people who are maybe having some behaviour issues, or who maybe are insecure, come across as a bit prickly, and you've got this really sort of prickly looking sort of porcupine who actually, if you stroke him, is incredibly soft, really soft. And quite often a child who's got, we've found this one to be particularly useful for people with things like autism and emotional needs, because they have found they relate for some reason. I mean, this is Spike Mark II. This is my own personal Spike. When I was in school, there was a Spike, and Spikey was used, I mean, permanently with one of my students who had autism, and she just kept this particular puppet in her room, on her desk, and it was actually how we engaged the very first time we met, when I was aware that there were some needs and she was feeling very anxious, and I introduced her to Spike, and it was a match made in heaven. So she and Spike just hit it off from the start. So this is Spike, which can be useful for that. Another one with a similar usefulness, if you like, is my little tortoise, which a lot of kids think is a turtle. It's actually a tortoise. But this is good because it goes right inside his shell, and if you work the tortoise properly, you'll notice he comes out incredibly slowly. And again, very useful for people who are shy, having difficulty with relationships, and then they sort of gradually come totally out of their shell, and then somebody might say something very sudden and then they'll go back in and disappear and just come round very, very slowly again. As I've said before, if you're using puppets, it's really important to get to know your puppet first, so that it looks more realistic, because children will engage better with a puppet that is not you looking at it all the time or you doing this. You know, if the puppet is here and you're sort of ignoring it, and then maybe occasionally just sort of touching it and sort of taking some attention, you know, giving it some attention, the child is more likely to relate to it and talk to it. And puppets are just so useful for getting children to talk. But also, as I've said before, the other advantage of puppets is quite often if a child has come over because you've got a puppet, and then you in turn give the child a puppet to then be playing with, other children will come over and be with that child. And that can be really useful for the child who's struggling with relationships, because then through having the puppet, other children will come over and spend time with them. So that's puppets, which I have spoken about before, and I will no doubt speak about again. The thing I normally mention first is actually using a child's name before giving an instruction. I've said this before, it's just so important. If you say, Fred, will you please give out the books? You've got Fred's attention, you've checked that. Fred hears the instruction, he does as he's told, everything's fine. If you say, give out the books, thank you, Fred. Fred looks up on hearing his name, doesn't know what he was asked to do, often gets told off for not doing it. Not really useful. Now, this isn't about being on the spectrum. It's not about having a speech language communication need, being dyslexic, having dyslexia, having dyspraxia, having dyscalculia, any of these things, or ADHD, ADD, whatever the area of need, saying someone's name first is going to get their attention. And they may not have an area of need. They may just simply have been daydreaming for whatever reason. You know, they've got a party that evening or something. Something's just great has just happened. And that's actually what they're thinking about. And therefore, you know, hearing their name, you get their attention, but they haven't heard the instruction. So the name before the instruction is really helpful. Another really important one is thinking time. Going along with a lot of areas of need is this struggle with processing, and therefore having time to think of your answer. So, you know, 10 5s, 3 4s, 6 7s, whatever it is, and then you say to a certain child, in a minute I'm going to ask you what 8 8s are. Then you go to a few others and you come back, so can you tell me what are 8 8s? Oh, 64. They've had a chance to process it, possibly write something down. So again, that's not a specific area of need, but processing difficulties cut across so many areas of need. And that also includes physical disabilities, where somebody is in pain and therefore they're struggling to keep their thought processes going, so they need that time to process because they're distracted by their pain. Anybody who's had severe pain of any sort would be aware of that. We quite often think about the disability in terms of what they can and can't physically do. Actually, there's also this background pain that can be affecting things like processing. Chunking information. So important. If we give a whole load of instructions to anyone, whatever their area of need, and even those who don't have a special educational need of any sort, it can just be information overload, and then they're like, whoa, and they forget. By the time they've heard all the instructions, they've forgotten the first one. So chunk it. We need to do this. We need to do that. And that can be chunked in overall class instructions. It can be chunked down even further with individual little reminders on someone's desk. That can be in picture form. It doesn't have to be in words, again, depending on the areas of need. Thinking about that. Another really important one, and it may not sound it, is positive framing. So instead of telling somebody what not to do, we tell them what to do. So instead of don't run, we say walk. Because if you say, and I've said this before, you know, don't think about the sky, you're now thinking about the sky. Whereas if you say, you may say the wrong thing first, as in don't think about the sky, think about this maths problem, you know, whatever it happens to be. So positively frame it. So instead of don't do this, it's do this. Because when we tell someone what not to do, that doesn't actually help them know what to do, as well as the whole they're then thinking of the thing you don't want them to do. There's also the fact that you haven't actually given any clarity about what they should be doing. So positive framing is really important. Targeted deserved praise. Gosh, very hard for somebody with a learning need and low self-esteem to accept praise. So if you just say, well done, that's great, yes, absolute star, that person sitting there thinking, yeah, right, you're going to say that, you're my teacher, or you're my mum, or you're my friend. If we are specific, that was really good handwriting. I can see that you've spent a lot of time on how to develop that script. Well done. Something specific. Well done in that piece of writing, because you actually used full stops for your sentences this time and you haven't done that before. I'm really proud of that. It can be anything, but very specific. Targeted deserved praise is important. Sensory overload. This business of smells in a classroom, temperature of a classroom, the visual displays everywhere, too much. So think about sensory overload. That's a really important one. I've just brought this over. This is my putty. I use this with, it's very useful with somebody who's got, for example, I've used it with somebody with, can't say it, cerebral palsy. But it's also, what I've done when I've used it is I've had a lot of these pots, and everyone in the group has had them. I was teaching a very small group, all their English, so that they had things like dyslexia. But what it meant was that, so I've hidden in there 10 beads, okay? And the idea is each bead gets taken out, and then you find another one. It was an occupational therapist who taught me this trick. Finding out the other one, got it. By having an exact amount, it doesn't have to be 10, I've just chosen 10, then it times the task, and it means that everyone can do it. And what you're doing is you're strengthening the fingers, which is really important for things like writing. So it doesn't just help people who are who have a physical need such as cerebral palsy, but it also was very useful for a child who was dyspraxic, because it was a good physical activity, and so on. Dyslexics, because it's a good fidget. ADHD, it's a great fidget, but it's contained because it's hiding these 10 pieces. And once you've found 10, their job then is to put the 10 back and hide them so they can't be easily seen for the next person. And that way, by having them find 10 and put 10 back, you're timing it so it's not going to go on for too long, okay? So that's another useful thing. I'm going to say 2 more for now, and I will do more another time, and that is a very important one, is restricted choice. If we say to someone, what do you want to do? That can be overloading for all sorts of people. But if you've given them a restricted choice, the things that you're asking them to choose between, just 2 things, are both things you want to happen, but you're also giving the other person some sense of control. So if you say, do you want to put on your hat first or your gloves, if it's a little kid, you're indicating they're going to do both, but they feel they've got some choice. I want to put my hat on first. I want to put my gloves on first, do you want to do this or this? And they're both things that, you don't mind which of them they do. Simple as that. Restricted choice. It makes the choosing easier, and for somebody, especially maybe on the spectrum or with speech and language, it can be quite hard to make a choice. If you've only got 2 things to choose between, that helps them with learning how to make a decision, make a choice. But also for somebody who maybe has difficulty in, they need to have control of everything, maybe with AS, other sorts of things that can lead to behaviours that are difficult to manage. Having, or in appropriate times, having a positive choice of 2 things, you want either of them to happen, gives them some sense of control. I've chosen to do this. I'm doing it. Not because you've told me to do it, because I have chosen it. So that's important. Another one is having cards, and I thought I had one with me and I don't. These are cards with maybe a tick on one side and a circle on the other. Green on one side, red on the other. The reason I've got the tick and the circle is because green and red, if you're colourblind, it's hard to tell the difference. So it helps to have some other indication. And it's just to put on your desk, and it can be just a page in your planner, so you open it on the red page or the green page, to indicate whether you need help. If it's green, ignore me. Don't give me any help. The reason for that is there are a lot of children for whom they're working really well, but because of their learning need, the minute they're interrupted by somebody saying, can I help you, they've lost their train of thought. Drat. If they've got that power to say, I need help now, and it's a very unobtrusive one, they don't have to put their hand up, they've literally just got to turn the page on the right colour, and everyone in the class has one. So it's not just them, you're not singling them out. There's a sense of being the same, not being singled out, which can be quite a struggle for some of our children. But if they can just open the planner on the right page, support. But if you do that, it's so important you respond to that support that's requested. Okay, so it's no point having that if you're not then going to respond. So those are really important things. Okay, and I will just show you again. Fidget strings, fidgets like this, and even something as simple as a gaming dice can be an amazing fidget. Let's allow our children to fidget if they need to. For some people, and I'm one of them, being able to be physically active in any way, even if it's only a small movement, can really help our concentration. It's not about the label, it's about the need. Thank you.